My name is Nancy Boy. Today is May 17, 2013. I'm going to interview Dr. Madeline Hsu, the Director of Center for Asian American Studies at UT campus, for Journey to Freedom documentary film. Good afternoon. Can you tell me your name, your day of birth, and your profession?
I'm Madeline Hsu. I was born on October 3rd, 1967, and I teach in the Department of History and serve as Director of the Center for Asian American Studies at UT Austin.
Wonderful. How and when did you come to U.S.?
I was born in the United States. I was born in Columbia, Missouri.
I see. Okay. What was your childhood like in Missouri?
I didn't actually spend that much time in Missouri. My family moved to Taiwan and Hong Kong, so I spent most of my growing up years before the age of 18 in Taiwan and Hong Kong.
How was life in those countries?
This was 1970s in Taiwan, and then in Hong Kong, and also in the 1980s, and so both of these places were in the process of developing. So I got to see at first hand this transition from being kind of more third world societies and economies to becoming the very developed and very affluent societies that we think of them being in the present. So it was actually a lot of fun as a kid to be in these places.
Did your parents ever talk about their years in, when they came from mainland? How's that?
My father was born on the Chinese mainland and went to Taiwan in 1949 and then came to the U.S. for graduate school. So I knew a certain amount about his growing up. I think it also helped that I lived in Taiwan, and I also got to know my grandparents on that side of the family. So all of that helps to understand better what things were like as my father was growing up. I think it also makes a big difference that I'm a historian, but places like Taiwan and Hong Kong have been in such a big transition. So Taiwan changes very quickly, Hong Kong changes very quickly, so I can kind of imagine what his life was like. With my mother, her parents were in Arkansas, where they ran a grocery store, and we also spent a lot of time with them as well. So I could see, have a sense of what family dynamics were. My grandmother on that side was very good at keeping in touch with different relatives. So yeah, I have a sense of what the family dynamic is.
From that background, was it influence you in any way that made you choose history as your career?
One of the big influences was actually my paternal grandfather, who was a fairly well-known Neo-Confucian scholar, and so I think I got a certain amount of proclivities in terms of being interested in doing research, in terms of asking questions, of wanting to be able to write things down, probably from that side of the family. That being said, the first book really was more about my mother's side of the family and their history of going back and forth between China and the United States, which when I did my research and when I wrote my book was not something that you saw in very many Asian American texts, much less in general American history.
But as you know, that most parents of Asian family want their children become a doctor, lawyer, thing like that. When you decided to go with history, what was their reaction like? Did you have any difficulty?
I had majored in history as an undergraduate with the idea that I would go into law school later on. But I did apply for graduate schools in my final year of college, and I got into an Ivy League school with full funding. So I was able to pursue my interests on my own. Pretty much after college, I could pursue my own career.
I see. But you have no reaction or objection from anyone?
They were concerned about whether or not I would be able to find a job, but because I was self-financed, I mean, they helped me out a very little bit, but there wasn't that much they could say about it.
What was the most challenging aspect for Asian women finding a career in history studies?
I think I represent a perspective that's not so common within the history discipline. I think another challenge was that my project was very transnational. It was examining Chinese moving back between the US and China, so it doesn't fit neatly into how people have been thinking about either American history or Asian history. But now, 15 years down the line, this kind of transnational projects are very commonplace because people now have a better understanding of migration and mobility, and just to only focus within national borders when you write these kinds of projects, in fact, is limiting in not very useful ways. So that was a big struggle. But it's the scholarship has borne out that this was an important way of thinking about things.
In that being said, in the last 2 decades, Asian American study has been created and in many universities across the country. In your opinion, what is the status of Asian American study in the U.S. right now?
Something that many people pay attention to is that there are a lot of Asian American students on college campuses. But going along with that then is the perception that Asian Americans represent a post-racial group, that the historical legacy in the United States of discrimination and segregation against populations of colors does not apply to Asian Americans. However, you need to be able to look at the history of Asians in the United States to understand key kinds of racial discriminations and racialization in U.S. history. And this is the fact that the earliest American immigration restrictions targeted Asians. And so the foundations of the immigration laws, the ideas of who should be kept out, also the institutional bureaucracies and the strategies that you try to use to enforce border controls actually all started out with Asians, particularly with Chinese, who were the earliest targets of enforced immigration restriction in 1882. U.S. laws around citizenship. Also, for most of U.S. history, Asians have not been allowed to have citizenship by naturalization. And so we need to actually understand the history of Asians in the United States and understand this, these long patterns of how and why they were not allowed to be or considered incompatible or impossible to integrate into American society, I think, in order to understand the present of the United States.
What's some of the advantages and disadvantages of these Asian American study program? Is it easy to get funding, or how's it?
Right now, there are widespread and recurring cuts to public education in general, higher education specifically, and because so many people see Asian Americans as a quote-unquote model minority, the need is not as great as for having other kinds of ethnic studies or other kinds of programs. So there's a lot of challenges for programs. In fact, there are national statistics which show that Asian American women faculty have the lowest rates of any group, regardless of race, regardless of gender, of getting tenure in the United States. So there's a lot of certain kinds of discriminations that still go on. Another issue is that Asian Americans are very much underrepresented at higher levels of administration in public education, in higher education. And so even though there's this perception that there are all these students on campuses, we have to be aware that a great many of these students, in fact, are international students, as universities try to go overseas for students who will pay higher tuitions. We should be aware that more of the undergraduate student body tend to be from already middle class backgrounds. They tend to be, say, ethnic Chinese or Korean or Asian Indian. Certain populations, particularly Southeast Asians, are underrepresented. So there are a host of issues, in fact, that attend Asian Americans on campus, much less this lack of understanding about why it is important to have Asian American studies.
Do you see any way or any opportunity to improve that?
Just to continue to try to raise awareness, and I think to actually promote political activism, because this is another area in which people assume that Asian Americans will complain less and will fight less, and so as cuts happen, it's easier to do so to Asian American studies and Asian American communities, but there needs to be more, I think, concerted protest.
Okay. You also work as an editor. Can you tell us about that?
You need
Editor,
to
yeah.
editor of what?
Book editor.
Okay, the anthologies. I've edited a couple of anthologies. One is called Chinese Americans and the Politics of Race and Culture. I've also edited the papers of some articles by Him-Mark Lai, who's a senior founding figure in Chinese American history. I also have another anthology forthcoming, which is thinking about the Pacific world, trying to conceptualize Pacific Rim studies. I shouldn't say Pacific Rim studies. So what you do in anthologies is you try to bring together a group of people around a set of shared research questions. So in the first collection, it was to think about Chinese American studies and to think about the intersections between culture and politics. So we have one article that looked at representations of Chinese Americans during World War II, which came out in a lot of newspaper representations, which people many times will think of as a cultural kind of manifestation, but it also reflected deeper kinds of shifts in the political relationship between China and the United States. I included an article of mine about chop suey and Chinese restaurants, and that during the 1950s they gained in prestige, and that also accompanied the shifting perceptions of Chinese Americans and gaining status and also gaining acceptance in this country. The second and the collection that I edited, the papers of Him-Mark Lai. Him-Mark Lai started doing his research in the 1960s, and he went around and he collected a lot of documents and he identified a lot of records that then really helped a lot of other researchers who came along later to be able to do their research. So his research collections are largely deposited in the Ethnic Studies Library at UC Berkeley. He was an incredibly generous person because he made it possible for all these other people to do their research. And you could go to him with ideas, and he would tell you what he thought. He would also tell you what kind of research materials were available. And so this anthology was an opportunity for his own writings to be showcased in a book, because he had been doing some of his own research. Some of the striking things about Him-Mark Lai is because he was not an academic. He had actually worked as an engineer at Bechtel, but that meant that he could do projects that he thought was important. And in fact, he was politically very courageous, because in the thick of the 1950s and 1960s, when there were people even getting assassinated or having their passports taken away, in fact his wife had her citizenship taken away, he was willing to write about very dangerous topics, such as writing more frankly about the nationalists, about the KMT, writing more frankly about the communist and leftist-leaning organizations. So he was a very important figure in many ways. The ongoing project that I'm editing is with two co-editors. One is Lankuro Shige of USC, and another is Yujin Yaguchi of Tokyo University. And we collected a group of about 15, 16 scholars who work both on Asian American, but also Japanese and Chinese perspectives, and also Pacific Islander scholars, to think about how we can think of the Pacific not as forming some sort of barrier between Asia and the Americas, but as a set of interlocking spaces, in which people travel back and forth. We have community formations, we have trade and migration, and also we have imperial projections across this area, but to be able to think of a Pacific world.
They will be published soon?
That one we are probably at the earliest 2014, more realistically 2015. People are revising their articles right now.
When did you decide to join UT Center for Asian American Studies?
I was brought to UT in 2006 with the charge of trying to develop the Asian American Studies Center.
How was it up until today? How many years ago?
I came in 2006, so this is my 7th year. The first few years have been very exciting. Since we've been experiencing budget cuts, it's been much more difficult to try to build up a new program. But one of the things that I thought was particularly exciting about coming to UT is that there's not been much work done about Asians in the South. Texas actually has the 3rd highest population of Asians of any state. Texas has more Asian Pacific Americans than even Hawaii or New Jersey or Illinois. But people really don't understand this. You could call it a set of quadrilateral race relations of white and black and Latino, but also Asian. And so it presents a really interesting and rich opportunity to think about race and ethnicity comparatively, but also to consider the place of Asians in a hemispheric framing of the Americas.
What is your, advantage and some difficulty over here? You think you achieve what you want to do yet?
I would say ideally I would have been able to recruit more faculty to UT and then also to retain them. We hired in some very good faculty, but UT has really been cutting a lot of people now. I think we could actually use about at least half a dozen more faculty here to really be able to offer a fully functioning program in terms of offering enough classes for our majors and minors. It'd be great to be able to bring in more graduate students such as Linda Ho Pache, who are working on projects about Asians in the South. So there's a bunch of things that we would have wanted to do if we had the resources. A lot of community outreach. I mean, we have been able to work with VAHF, but I think what we've been able to do, in fact, is much more limited than I would like.
In spring 2008, you decided to offer Vietnamese American culture and history a part of your curriculum. Can you tell us the reason for this study season and the reason for that happened?
It was very exciting for the Center for Asian American Studies to be able to offer this class. One, it talks particularly about Vietnamese American experiences. Vietnamese are the 1st or 2nd largest Asian ethnic group in Texas, so it's really wonderful to be able to have a course that addresses this population. We also are very happy to have Linda Ho Pache teach it. She herself grew up Vietnamese American in Texas. She also is an anthropologist who uses ethnography and a lot of oral history. And one of the foundational aspects of trying to promote research about Asian Americans, as with any ethnic community, is to go out there and try to make sure that you record people's stories. And so oral history is a really critical part of this kind of research.
How did the class go, and was you happy about it, and it's still offering on your curriculum now?
The class went very well. It even got written up in the local newspaper, the Austin American Statesman. Linda was able to arrange for her students to exhibit some of their research projects in several different locations around town. She also started then working with VAHF to collect more oral interviews. And these interviews are being made available for public research purposes. We don't currently continue to offer the class. The classes that we're able to offer are really contingent on who is on campus. And unfortunately, UT has just fired the only Vietnamese American faculty.
I see. In your opinion, how fair had the media coverage been on the Vietnam War, especially in regard to the Vietnamese people?
I have no expertise in this. This is something I don't follow.
I see. You about the textbook, the discussion about this topic on textbook?
I don't follow.
Okay. Anything that you want to talk about? I think I need to ask you this: what the student can do with their bachelor degree on Asian American study. If they will study this topic and earn a bachelor degree, what they could use for in real life.
We have had students, one of the first major in Asian American Studies actually went on to law school and is now practicing law in a firm in, I think, Saudi Arabia. So we've had many students go on for legal careers. We've had several students go on into med school. We've also had several students go on to work in the state legislature as legislative aides. So right now we have one of our majors is currently an intern for one of the state representatives. We have students who go into social work. One of our students even went and worked for the Blue Man Group. He thinks he's probably the first Asian American Blue Man. So there's a host of different things you can go into. Asian American Studies offers a very strong interdisciplinary training, bringing together fields such as sociology, history, anthropology, English. We also are very attentive to very practical matters around politics and law and institutions of American society. And students learn to think very critically and to be very attentive to matters surrounding race and gender and inequality. And also, I think, because the classes are small, they get much better training in terms of having research and writing skills. So it's actually proven to be a very useful major for our students.
I see. You got good review for the program here in UT
Students,
Austin?
yes. From students, yes. There is a tendency, unfortunately, especially from the Higher Education Coordinating Board, to reduce everything to numbers. But that's not a true measure of what a program does. We're a small program and we provide students with really excellent training. They get a lot of interaction with faculty. It's very personalized. So I think it's a wonderful thing to be able to have at such a large institution such as UT.
Is there anything that you want to talk about and we haven't not asked you? And if so, can you share with us?
I think VAHF is doing very important work in collecting these oral interviews. It's really critical to a community such as that of Vietnamese Americans to have people who understand the importance of their history and making sure the history is documented and made available. So it's a really critical project. I'm glad the Center for Asian American Studies has been able to help in a very small way.
Well, thank you very much, and we appreciate your time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We need